Eva Sterling had no idea she was lighting a fuse when she walked across the grand ballroom and offered her hand to Matteo Moretti, the autistic son the powerful Moretti crime family kept hidden in the shadows. She couldn't have known that this single act would throw her into the heart of a vicious power struggle, a war of succession, fought with bullets and betrayal for the soul of New York's most feared criminal dynasty. All she saw was a man lost in the noise, a man who needed a moment of grace in a world built on cruelty. That one choice set everything in motion. The Atoria Grand was the kind of hotel where men in $10,000 suits pretended they weren't counting bodies in their heads, where champagne flowed like water and every handshake carried the weight of a signed contract written in blood. The annual Winter Charity Gala wasn't about charity at all. It was theater. A performance where New York's most dangerous people dressed up like philanthropists and smiled for cameras while their enforcers stood along the walls, hands folded, eyes scanning. Eva Sterling had been to a dozen events like this. She worked for the Whitman Foundation, one of those non-profit organizations that rich people use to launder reputations. Her job was simple: show up, smile, collect checks, pretend the money wasn't dirty. Tonight was supposed to be no different. She wore a black dress that cost more than her rent, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look older than 26. And she carried a champagne flute she had no intention of drinking from. She was good at blending in, good at being invisible. But then she saw him, Matteo Moretti. He was standing in the corner near the service hallway, half hidden behind a marble column, his hands pressed flat against his thighs, like he was hold himself together through sheer force of will. He wasn't talking to anyone. No one was talking to him. In a room full of people desperate to be seen, Matteo looked like he was trying to disappear. Eva knew who he was. Everyone did. The younger Moretti son, the one the family didn't talk about, the one who didn't give speeches at funerals or shake hands at weddings, the one people whispered about in hallways when they thought no one was listening. Damaged, broken, embarrassing. She'd heard the rumors that Salvatore Moretti's younger son was slow, that he couldn't handle pressure, that he had episodes, that he was kept around out of pity, not power. But watching him now, Eva didn't see weakness. She saw a man drowning. The ballroom was chaos dressed up as elegance. A live orchestra played too loud. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across every surface. Hundreds of voices layered over each other in a suffocating wave of sound. The air smelled like perfume and cigar smoke and something floral that was trying too hard. For most people, it was background noise. For Matteo, it looked like torture. His jaw was tight, his breathing shallow. His eyes were locked on a single point on the floor, unfocused, like he was using every ounce of energy just to stay upright. His fingers twitched against his legs in a rhythm only he could hear. Eva had seen this before, not in ballrooms, not in men who came from families like the Morettis. But she'd seen it. Sensory overload. Her younger brother had autism. She knew what it looked like when the world became too much, when every sound turned into a hammer and every light became a blade. When your own body stopped feeling like yours. She didn't think, she just moved. Eva set her champagne glass on a passing tray and crossed the ballroom floor. Heads turned. Conversations paused. She felt the weight of 100 eyes on her back, but she didn't stop. She walked straight up to Matteo Moretti, the man everyone was pretending didn't exist, and she stopped directly in front of him. He didn't look up. "Matteo," she said quietly, his breathing hitched. His eyes darted toward her face for half a second before snapping back to the floor. She didn't reach for him, didn't crowd his space, just stood there, close enough to be present, but far enough to let him breathe. "My name's Eva," she said. "I know this room is hell. I know you didn't want to be here, but you're here and I see you. And I think you need an exit strategy." His fingers stopped twitching. "I'm going to ask you to dance," she continued, her voice calm, steady. "Not because I want to dance, not because anyone's watching, but because it'll give you a reason to move, a reason to leave this spot, a reason to do something other than stand here and try not to break." Matteo's throat moved. He still didn't look at her. "You don't have to say yes," Eva said. "But if you do, I'll make sure we stay on the edge of the floor where the lights aren't as bright. I'll make sure we move slow. And the second you want to stop, we stop. No questions." For a long moment, Matteo didn't move. Then slowly he lifted his hand. Eva took it. His palm was damp with sweat. His grip was stiff, uncertain, like he'd forgotten how hands were supposed to work. But he let her guide him toward the dance floor, and that was enough. The orchestra was playing something slow and classical. Couples swayed in careful circles, performing intimacy for an audience that didn't care. Ava led Matteo to the far edge of the floor, away from the chandelier's worst glare, away from the densest crowd. She placed one hand lightly on his shoulder. He flinched but didn't pull away. "You don't have to look at me," she said. "You don't have to talk. Just follow my lead." They moved barely. It wasn't dancing so much as controlled standing, but Matteo's breathing started to even out. His shoulders dropped half an inch, his hand still gripping hers like a lifeline, relaxed, just enough to stop hurting, and then Ava felt it. The room had gone quiet, not literally. The music still played. People still talked, but there was a shift in the air, a change in the current. Conversations were stopping. Heads were turning. Eyes were locking onto them with the kind of focus that made Ava's stomach twist. She glanced over Matteo's shoulder and saw them. Salvatore Moretti, the patriarch, a man in his 70s with silver hair and a face carved from granite. He stood near the bar, flanked by two men who looked like they killed people for a living. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on his son. Beside him stood another man, younger, broader, handsome in a way that felt dangerous. Lorenzo Moretti, the older brother, the heir, the one everyone said would take over the family when Salvatore finally stepped down. Lorenzo wasn't looking at Matteo. He was looking at Ava, and he was smiling. It wasn't a kind smile. Ava's pulse spiked, but she didn't let go of Matteo's hand. She kept moving, kept her voice low and steady. "We're almost done," she murmured. "Just a little longer." Matteo's fingers tightened around hers. The song ended. Ava stepped back, releasing him carefully. Matteo's eyes were still down, but his breathing was controlled now, steady. He looked less like he was about to shatter. "Thank you," she said softly. Matteo didn't respond, but his hand, the one that had been gripping hers, lifted slightly. Just an inch. Just enough to acknowledge her. Then he turned and walked toward the service hallway, disappearing into the shadows like he'd never been there at all. Ava stood alone on the edge of the dance floor, her heart pounding, her skin prickling with the sensation of being watched. She didn't need to turn around to know that every dangerous person in that room had just added her name to a list. She'd crossed a line, and she had no idea how much it was going to cost her. 48 hours later, Ava was walking home from the subway when the car pulled up beside her. It was black, expensive, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in her neighborhood. The back window rolled down, and a man she didn't recognize leaned out. "Miss Sterling," he said. "Mr. Moretti would like a word." Ava's throat went dry. Which one? The one that matters. She should have run, should have screamed, should have done anything other than what she did. But she got in the car. The drive took 20 minutes. They didn't blindfold her, didn't threaten her, just drove in silence through Manhattan and into Brooklyn, past warehouses and shipping yards, until they reached a gated estate that looked like it had been ripped out of another century. The Moretti compound. Ava had heard about it. Everyone had. But seeing it in person was different. High walls, armed guards, cameras on every corner. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. The car stopped in front of a sprawling mansion. The man who picked her up opened her door and gestured for her to follow. Ava's legs felt like water, but she forced herself to move. Inside, the house was all dark wood and leather furniture, expensive cold, the kind of place where violence had soaked into the walls, and no amount of money could cover the stain. She was led into a study. Salvatore Moretti sat behind a massive desk, his hands folded in front of him. Lorenzo stood near the window, arms crossed, watching her like she was something that needed to be assessed and catalogued. And in the corner, half hidden in shadow, was Matteo. He didn't look at her. "Miss Sterling," Salvatore said. His voice was rough, worn down by decades of cigarettes and hard decisions. "Sit." Ava sat. Salvatore studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Do you know what you did 2 nights ago?" Ava's mouth was dry. "I danced with your son." "You made a spectacle," Lorenzo said from the window. His voice was smooth, controlled. "You put a spotlight on him in front of people who don't forget. You drew attention to a part of this family that we've spent years keeping quiet." "I helped him," Ava said, her voice sharper than she intended. He was having a panic attack in the middle of a room full of people who didn't give a damn. "I didn't make a spectacle. I stopped one." Lorenzo's smile didn't reach his eyes. You think you're a hero. I think I'm someone who saw a person in pain and did something about it. Salvatore held up a hand, silencing his older son. He looked at Ava with an expression she couldn't read. You work for the Whitman Foundation, he said. You have a degree in social work. You volunteer at a community center in Queens. You have a younger brother who's 17, autistic, nonverbal. Ava's blood turned to ice. You looked into me. Of course I did. Salvatore's tones was matter of fact. You touched my son. That means you're my business now. I didn't mean. I don't care what you meant. Salvatore leaned forward. I care what you did. And what you did was something no one else in that room was capable of. You saw Matteo, not the embarrassment, not the liability. You saw a person who needed help, and you helped him. Ava didn't know what to say. Salvatore glanced at Matteo, still standing silent in the corner. Then he looked back at Ava. My son has a condition, he said slowly. He doesn't process the world the way most people do. Loud rooms, bright lights, unexpected changes, they break him down. We've tried doctors, therapists, medications, nothing works. And the world we live in, he gestured vaguely at the walls. It's not built for someone like him. So, you hide him, Ava said quietly. I protect him, Salvatore's voice hardened. Because if people see weakness in this family, they use it, they exploit it, they turn it into a weapon. He's not weak. The room went still. Lorenzo turned from the window, his expression sharp. Salvatore's eyes narrowed. What did you say? Ava's heart was pounding, but she didn't back down. He's not weak. He's overwhelmed. There's a difference. If you built an environment that worked for him instead of against him, he wouldn't need to hide. Salvatore stared at her for a long, dangerous moment. Then he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who just found something useful. You're going to prove that, he said. Ava blinked. What? You're going to work for me full-time. Your job is Matteo. You'll live here. You'll help him function. You'll do whatever it takes to make sure he can exist in this world without falling apart. I have a job. You'll be paid triple what the Whitman Foundation gives you, plus housing, plus anything you need for your brother's care. Ava's stomach dropped. You can't just. I can. Salvatore's voice was iron. And I am. You want to help people, Miss Sterling? Fine. Help him. Prove to me that my son isn't the lost because everyone thinks he is. Ava looked at Matteo. He still hadn't moved, still hadn't spoken, but his eyes for just a second flicked toward hers, and in that glance, she saw something she hadn't expected. Hope. Ava took a breath. Okay, she said. I'll do it. Salvatore nodded. Good. Lorenzo will show you to your room. Lorenzo pushed off the window, his expression unreadable. This way. Ava stood, her legs shaking, and followed him out of the study. As they walked down a long hallway, lined with portraits of dead men, Lorenzo spoke without looking at her. You just made the worst decision of your life. Maybe, Ava said. Or maybe, I just made the best one. Lorenzo laughed. It was a cold sound. We'll see. Ava's room was on the third floor at the far end of the east wing. It was bigger than her apartment, a king-sized bed, a private bathroom, a window that overlooked the compound's gardens. It should have felt like luxury. It felt like a cage. She didn't sleep that first night, just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the walls, wondering what the hell she'd gotten herself into. At 6 in the morning, there was a knock on her door. Ava opened it. Matteo stood in the hallway dressed in dark pants and a plain shirt. His hands were at his sides, fingers tapping a rhythm against his legs. He didn't look at her face, but he was there. They said you're supposed to help me, he said quietly. His voice was low, careful, like every word cost him something. Ava nodded. That's the plan. Matteo was silent for a moment, then he said, I don't need help. Okay, he blinked. Okay, you don't need help. Ava repeated. Got it. So, what do you need? Matteo's fingers stopped tapping. I need people to stop looking at me like I'm broken, he said. Ava met his eyes. Then, let's make sure they don't have a reason to. For the first time since she'd met him, Matteo almost smiled. Follow me, he said. And Ava did. Over the next 2 weeks, Ava learned more about the Moretti family than she ever wanted to know. Salvatore ran the organization like a corporation, clean on the surface, deadly underneath. They had their hands in construction, shipping, real estate, and a dozen other industries that served as fronts for everything from loan sharking to drug distribution. The family didn't deal in street-level crime. They dealt in infrastructure, in supply chains, in making sure the right people got paid and the wrong people disappeared. Lorenzo was being groomed to take over. He was charismatic, ruthless, smart enough to play the political game, and violent enough to remind people why they should be afraid. Everyone assumed he'd be the next head of the family. No one talked about Matteo. He existed in the margins. He had an office in the compound, but no one ever went in. He attended family meetings, but he never spoke. He was a ghost in his own home. But Ava started to see things no one else did. Matteo wasn't absent. He was watching. He noticed everything. The way Lorenzo's enforcers shifted their weight when they lied. The way financial reports didn't match up with shipment logs. The way certain captains avoided eye contact when Salvatore asked questions. He saw patterns, connections, problems that everyone else missed. He just didn't know how to communicate them. Ava's job became translation. She started small, adjusted his environment, dimmed the lights in his office, installed noise-canceling panels, built routines that gave him structure, meal times, work blocks, quiet hours, predictability, and slowly, Matteo started to relax. He talked more, not a lot, but enough. He explained how sounds layered in his head, how certain textures felt like fire on his skin, how eye contact was painful, not because he didn't care, but because it was too intense. Ava listened, and she started to realize something terrifying. Matteo wasn't the weak link in the Moretti family. He was the most dangerous one, because while Lorenzo played power games and Salvatore made deals, Matteo was quietly mapping the entire organization in his head, every transaction, every route, every vulnerability. He knew things no one else knew. He saw things no one else saw. And when Ava asked him why he never said anything, his answer was simple: no one listens. That changed the night Lorenzo made his first mistake. It was a Thursday late. Most of the house was asleep. Ava was in Matteo's office helping him organize shipping records when he stopped mid-sentence. His hand hovered over a spreadsheet. His eyes locked onto a series of numbers. "What is it?" Ava asked. "This doesn't match," Matteo said slowly. "What doesn't match?" He pulled up another file, then another. His fingers moved across the keyboard faster than Ava had ever seen him move. "These shipments," he said, "they're listed as going to Baltimore, but the fuel costs don't match the distance. The weight reports are wrong. The timing's off." Ava frowned. "Maybe it's a clerical error." No, Matteo's voice was sharper now. "It's not an error. It's deliberate. Someone's rerouting shipments, skimming product, covering it up with fake invoices." "Who?" Matteo pulled up a final document. A signature at the bottom: Lorenzo Moretti. Ava's stomach dropped. "Are you sure?" Matteo didn't answer. He was already pulling more files, more records, building a case in real time. By the time the sun came up, he'd mapped out an entire operation. Lorenzo had been siphoning money and product from the family for over a year, selling it off books, using the profits to build his own network, his own power base. He was preparing for a coup, and no one knew except Matteo. Ava stared at the screen, her heart pounding. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Matteo looked at her. For the first time since they'd met, his eyes were clear, focused, certain. "I'm going to tell my father," he said, and everything changed. Salvatore's office felt colder at 3 in the morning. The old man sat behind his desk in a burgundy robe, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. His face carved into an expression Ava couldn't decipher. Matteo stood across from him, rigid as a board, holding a tablet loaded with every piece of evidence he'd spent the last 6 hours compiling. Ava stayed near the door, her role unclear, but her presence somehow necessary. Lorenzo wasn't there yet. Salvatore had sent for him, but the older brother was taking his time. A power move, maybe. Or maybe he already sensed what was coming. "Show me," Salvatore said finally. Matteo's fingers moved across the screen. He didn't look at his father's face, just talked to the data. His voice flat but certain. "Baltimore shipments, 12 over the last 14 months. Manifest list full containers. Fuel receipts match long-haul routes, but the weight reports are inconsistent. Too light by an average of 18% per load." He swiped to another screen, cross-referenced with warehouse intake logs. Product arrives in Baltimore, gets logged, then disappears from inventory within 48 hours. No distribution records, no secondary sales, just gone. Another swipe. Track the money. Invoices show payment to a holding company called Crescent Maritime. Crescent Maritime doesn't own ships, doesn't employ drivers. It's a shell registered in Delaware 2 years ago. Sole officer is a name that doesn't exist, but the bank account routing number traces back to a secondary account held by Lorenzo. "Lorenzo," Salvatore finished, his voice like a gravel. Matteo nodded. Salvatore leaned back in his chair. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at the screen, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. Then the door opened. Lorenzo walked in, still wearing the suit from whatever meeting or party he'd been at. He looked relaxed, confident, like being summoned at 3 in the morning was just another Tuesday. "Pop," he said easily. "What's the emergency?" Salvatore didn't answer. Just turned the tablet around so Lorenzo could see the screen. Lorenzo glanced at it. His expression didn't change, didn't even flicker. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "Your second income," Salvatore said. The room went silent. Lorenzo's eyes shifted to Matteo, then to Ava, then back to his father. "I don't know what he told you," Lorenzo said carefully. "But you know how Matteo gets. He sees patterns that aren't there, connects dots that don't exist. This is just." "Crescent Maritime," Salvatore interrupted. "Your shell company, your account, your theft." Lorenzo's smile finally cracked just a little. "You're taking his word over mine. I'm taking evidence over excuses." Lorenzo's hands curled into fists at his sides, but his voice stayed controlled. "Pop, listen to me. Matteo doesn't understand how the business works. He sees numbers and thinks he's found something. But he doesn't know context. He doesn't know the deals we've had to make, the off-book arrangements that keep this family running. If you let him convince you that I'm—" "Stop talking," Salvatore said quietly. Lorenzo stopped. Salvatore stood. He was shorter than his older son, but the weight of his presence filled the room. "You've been stealing from me," he said. "From this family, building your own operation on my back, and you thought I wouldn't notice." "I thought you'd be dead by now," Lorenzo said. The air turned to ice. Ava's breath caught. Matteo went completely still. Salvatore stared at his son like he was seeing him for the first time. "Say that again," Salvatore said softly. Lorenzo's mask was gone now. His face was hard, angry, stripped of pretense. "You're 74 years old," Lorenzo said. "You've had 2 heart attacks. Your doctors give you maybe 5 years, if you're lucky. I've been running this organization for the last decade, while you sit in this office and pretend you're still the man you used to be. I've earned the right to build something for myself to prepare for the transition, because when you're gone, this empire is mine. We both know it. You think power is something you inherit?" Salvatore said, "Like a watch, like a name. I think power is something you take." Lorenzo shot back. "And I've been taking it while you weren't looking." Salvatore's hand moved faster than Ava thought possible for a man his age. He grabbed the whiskey glass and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall 2 inches from Lorenzo's head. Lorenzo didn't flinch. "Get out," Salvatore said, his voice shaking with rage. "Get out of my house. Get out of my business. You're done." Lorenzo laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. "You can't cut me out, old man. I'm the face of this family. I'm the one who sits down with the other bosses. I'm the one they respect. You think you can just erase me and everything keeps running smooth? I think you underestimate how replaceable you are, and I think you overestimate how much loyalty you have left." Lorenzo stepped closer to the desk. "You want to cast me out? Fine, but half the captains answer to me now, half the crews, half the income. You burn me, you burn yourself." Salvatore's jaw clenched. Lorenzo glanced at Matteo, his expression twisting into something cruel. "You really think he can take my place?" Lorenzo said, gesturing at his younger brother. "You think Matteo, who can't even handle a damn dinner party without falling apart, can run this organization? He's a liability, Pop. He always has been. And now you're going to let him destroy this family because he found some spreadsheets he doesn't understand." "He understands more than you ever did," Ava said. Both men turned to look at her. Lorenzo's smile was razor thin. "And who the hell are you?" "Someone who actually gives a damn about him," Ava said. Her voice was shaking, but she didn't back down. "Matteo didn't invent this evidence. He didn't fabricate it. Because he's better at seeing the truth than you are at hiding it." Lorenzo took a step toward her. Matteo moved. It wasn't fast, wasn't aggressive, but he stepped between Lorenzo and Ava, his body angled like a wall. "Don't," Matteo said quietly. Lorenzo stared at his younger brother. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise maybe, or calculation, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "This isn't over," Lorenzo said. He looked back at Salvatore. "You want a war, old man. I'll give you one." Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed felt like the aftermath of an explosion. Salvatore sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 74 years. He pressed a hand to his chest. His breathing labored. "Pop," Matteo said, his voice uncertain. "I'm fine," Salvatore muttered. But he wasn't. His skin was gray. His hand was trembling. Ava moved without thinking. She crossed the room, grabbed the phone on Salvatore's desk, and dialed the compound's medical line. "We need a doctor in the main office now." Salvatore waved her off. "I said I'm fine." "You're not," Ava said firmly. "And you don't get to collapse before you fix this mess." Salvatore almost smiled. Almost. The doctor arrived 5 minutes later. An older man named Castellano, who'd been patching up the Moretti family for 3 decades. He checked Salvatore's vitals, gave him something for his blood pressure, and told him in no uncertain terms to get some rest. Salvatore ignored him. "Matteo," he said. "Sit." Matteo sat. Salvatore looked at his younger son for a long moment. Then he said, "You did good tonight." Matteo's fingers tapped against his leg. He didn't respond. "I mean it," Salvatore continued. "You saw something everyone else missed. You brought me proof. You didn't let Lorenzo twist it into something else. That took guts." "I just showed you the numbers," Matteo said quietly. "You showed me the truth," Salvatore corrected. "And now I need you to do something harder." Matteo's tapping stopped. "I need you to step up," Salvatore said. "Lorenzo's right about one thing. I'm not going to be around forever. And if he's already building a faction, already planning a move, then I need someone I can trust to hold this family together. Someone who sees the whole picture. Someone who can't be bought or manipulated." "You're talking about me," Matteo said slowly. "I'm talking about you." Matteo shook his head. "I can't do what Lorenzo does. I can't sit in rooms full of people and negotiate. I can't shake hands and smile and pretend. I can't." "You don't have to do it the way he does," Salvatore interrupted. "You do it your way. You use what you're good at. You see the patterns. You find the problems. You fix them before they explode. That's power, Matteo. Real power, not the performance. The results." Matteo looked at Ava. She didn't know what he wanted from her: permission, reassurance, an escape route. But she held his gaze. "You can do this," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can," Matteo admitted. "Then we'll figure it out together." Salvatore watched the exchange, something unreadable passing across his face. Then he stood, wincing slightly, and placed a hand on Matteo's shoulder. "You've been invisible your whole life," he said. "That ends now." Lorenzo didn't leave quietly. Over the next 2 weeks, the compound became a pressure cooker. Captains were called in for private meetings. Loyalties were tested. Money moved in ways that didn't show up on any ledger. The family was fracturing, and everyone knew it. Salvatore tried to hold the center. He called summits, made promises, reminded people who'd built the empire they were all feeding off. But his health was failing, and everyone could see it. He had another episode 6 days after the confrontation with Lorenzo. A minor heart attack that left him bedridden for 3 days. The doctor said he needed rest. Salvatore said he needed to finish what he started. Matteo became his proxy. It wasn't a formal announcement. Salvatore didn't call a meeting and declare Matteo his heir. He just started sending him to places Lorenzo used to go, started asking him to review contracts Lorenzo used to handle, started putting him in rooms where decisions were made. And Matteo, with Ava at his side, started to prove he could handle it. The first meeting was a disaster. It was with a group of union reps who controlled the longshoremen at the Brooklyn docks. Lorenzo had always handled them with a mix of charm and intimidation. Matteo walked in, sat down, and didn't say a word for the first 10 minutes. The reps thought he was weak, started making jokes, testing him. Then Matteo opened his laptop and pulled up a file. "You've been skimming," he said flatly. The room went quiet. "Excuse me," one of the reps said. Matteo didn't look up from the screen. Shipment logs show consistent overages on container weights. Small amounts, 2–3% per load, adds up over time. You've been reporting full deliveries, charging full rates, and pocketing the difference. 14 months, roughly $230,000. The rep's face went red. "That's a hell of an accusation." "It's not an accusation," Matteo said. "It's math." He turned the laptop around, showed them the numbers, the dates, the discrepancies. "You can either pay it back," Matteo continued, his voice calm, almost bored, "or we pull our business, and you explain to your guys why they're not getting work anymore." The reps looked at each other. One of them started to argue. Matteo cut him off. "I don't negotiate," he said. "I'm just telling you what's going to happen." They paid. Ava watched the whole thing from the corner of the room, her heart pounding. When they left, she turned to Matteo. That was terrifying, she said. Was it bad? Matteo asked, genuinely uncertain. No, Ava said, a smile tugging at her lips. It was perfect. Matteo's reputation started to shift after that. People stopped seeing him as Salvatore's damaged son, started seeing him as something else, something harder to predict, harder to manipulate. Lorenzo noticed. He started pushing back, harder, louder. He pulled captains into private rooms and reminded them who'd been running things for the last decade. He made promises, threats. He positioned himself as the inevitable future and Matteo as a temporary distraction. And it worked, sort of. The family split, not evenly, but enough to matter. Lorenzo had the loyalty of the old guard, the men who valued tradition, charisma, the appearance of strength. Salvatore and Matteo had the pragmatists, the ones who cared about results, about money, about staying out of prison. It wasn't a clean divide. Some captains played both sides. Some waited to see who'd win before committing. The whole organization became a minefield. Ava saw the toll it took on Matteo. He wasn't built for this kind of sustained pressure. The constant meetings, the politics, the need to be alert, engaged, present. He started losing sleep, skipping meals. His routines fell apart. One night, she found him in his office at 2 a.m. staring at a blank spreadsheet, his hands shaking. Matteo, she said gently. He didn't look at her. I can't do this. Ava crossed the room and sat down beside him. Yes, you can. I'm not Lorenzo, I'm not my father. I don't know how to make people follow me. You don't need to make them follow you, Ava said. You just need to show them you're right, and you've been doing that every single day. Matteo's jaw clenched. What if it's not enough? Then we'll find another way. He finally looked at her. His eyes were bloodshot, exhausted, but there was something else there, too. Something that looked like gratitude. Why are you still here? He asked quietly. Ava didn't have to think about the answer. Because you're worth it. Matteo didn't respond, but his hand resting on the desk moved slightly, just enough to touch hers. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just breathing. And for the first time in weeks, Matteo's hand stopped shaking. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Salvatore called a full family summit, every captain, every major player. He wanted to settle this before it turned into open war, wanted to force Lorenzo and Matteo into the same room and make them figure out a path forward. It was a terrible idea, but no one was willing to tell the old man no. The meeting was held in the main hall of the compound, a massive room with veinted ceilings and dark wood paneling that made everything feel like a courtroom. 30 men filled the space, sitting at a long table that stretched the length of the room. Salvatore sat at the head. Matteo sat to his right. Lorenzo sat to his left. Ava wasn't allowed in. She waited outside in the hallway, pacing her stomach in knots. Inside, the tension was immediate. Salvatore opened with a speech about unity, about family, about the need to set aside personal ambition for the good of the organization. It was a good speech, well delivered, completely ineffective. The captains didn't care about unity. They cared about power, about who was going to be signing their checks in 6 months. Lorenzo spoke next. He was smooth, confident. He talked about his record, about the deals he'd closed, the wars he'd prevented, the money he'd made. He positioned himself as the natural heir, the safe choice, the man who could keep the empire running without missing a beat. Then he turned to Matteo. My brother is brilliant, Lorenzo said, his tone almost kind. No one's questioning that. He sees things the rest of us miss. He's valuable, but running an organization like this isn't about spreadsheets. It's about people. It's about looking someone in the eye and making them believe you. And Matteo, he paused, letting the silence stretch. Matteo can't even look people in the eye. A few of the captains shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded. Salvatore's face darkened, but he didn't interrupt. Lorenzo continued, I respect what Pop's trying to do. I understand why he wants to believe Matteo can step into this role. But we all know the truth. Matteo's not built for leadership. He's built for support, and there's no shame in that. Let him do what he's good at. Let him handle the numbers, the logistics. But don't put the future of this family on his shoulders. He'll break, and we'll all pay the price. The room was silent. Then Matteo stood. Everyone turned to look at him. He didn't meet their eyes, didn't try to perform confidence or charisma. He just pulled out his tablet and set it on the table. 3 weeks ago, Matteo said quietly, Lorenzo told me this organization couldn't function without him, that half the captains were loyal to him, that cutting him out would collapse the family. He tapped the screen. I decided to test that. The room tensed. Matteo pulled up a document. This is a full accounting of every captain's income over the last 18 months, broken down by source, contracts, distribution, protection, side deals. He swiped to the next page. This column shows income directly tied to Lorenzo's operations, deals he brokered, contacts he maintained, revenue streams he controls. He swiped again. This column shows income tied to the family's core infrastructure, shipping routes, real estate holdings that existed before Lorenzo and will exist after him. He turned the tablet so everyone could see the numbers. On average, Matteo said, Lorenzo controls about 18% of any given captain's income. 18%. Important, yes, but not irreplaceable. If Lorenzo leaves and we restructure his operations under central management, income drops by an estimated 9% in the short term, recovers within 6 months. He looked at Lorenzo for the first time. You're not the engine, Matteo said. You're a part at parts can be replaced. Lorenzo's face went white, then red. You arrogant little. I also found this, Matteo interrupted. He pulled up another file. Emails, bank transfers, meeting logs. You've been talking to the Volkov family, Matteo said. The Russians, our competitors. You've been feeding them information about our routes, our shipments, our vulnerabilities, in exchange for a guarantee that when you take over, they'll recognize your authority and won't move against you. The room exploded. Captain started shouting, Summit Lorenzo, Summit Matteo, Summit Salvatore. Lorenzo slammed his hand on the table. That it's documented, Matteo said calmly. He turned the tablet toward Salvatore. Emails from an encrypted account registered to Crescent Maritime, the same shell company you used to hide your theft, cross-referenced with meeting times and locations confirmed by surveillance. Salvatore stared at the screen. His face was stone. You sold us out, he said quietly. Lorenzo's hands were shaking. Pop! Listen to me. You sold us out to the Russians. I was protecting my position, Lorenzo shouted. You were dying. Matteo was useless. I had to make deals to secure the transition, to make sure we didn't fall apart the second you were gone. So, you betrayed us. Lorenzo's jaw clenched. I did what I had to do. Salvatore stood slowly. His face was pale. His breathing labored, but his voice was steady. Get out, he said. Lorenzo didn't move. Get out of this room, Salvatore repeated. Get out of this house. Get out of this family. You're done. Lorenzo looked around the table, at the captains, at the men who'd followed him for years. None of them met his eyes. You're making a mistake, Lorenzo said. I made the mistake 30 years ago, Salvatore said. When I thought you were my son, Lorenzo's face twisted into something ugly. He grabbed his coat and walked toward the door. But before he left, he turned back. This isn't over, he said. You think you've won, but you haven't. You've just started a war you can't finish. Then he was gone. The room sat in stunned silence. Salvatore looked at Matteo. You held that back, he said. Matteo nodded. I wanted to see if he'd tell the truth first. And when he didn't, I made sure everyone knew what he really was. Salvatore almost smiled. Almost. You're learning, he said. Matteo didn't respond, but for the first time since the meeting started, his hands were steady. Outside in the hallway, Ava heard the door open, saw Lorenzo walk past without looking at her, saw the rage carved into his face, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. Lorenzo didn't go quietly into exile. He went to war. The first attack came 3 days after the summit. A shipment of product heading to Philadelphia got intercepted, not by police, by professionals. The drivers were left alive, but the cargo vanished. Clean, surgical. The kind of operation that required inside information. Salvatore called an emergency meeting. The captains who'd stayed loyal looked nervous. The ones who'd been on the fence looked terrified. Everyone knew what an intercept like that meant. Lorenzo had people inside, people they'd trusted. Matteo sat beside his father. Staring at the incident report with the kind of focus Ava had learned meant he was processing something the rest of the room couldn't see yet. Who knew the route? Salvatore asked. One of the captains, a thick-necked man named Caruso, cleared his throat. It was standard protocol. Same route we've used for 6 months. Could have been a lucky guess. There's no such thing as luck, Matteo said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Matteo pulled up a map on his tablet. This route passes through 4 territories. 2 of them are controlled by families friendly to us. One's neutral. The last one belongs to a crew that's been pushing for a bigger cut of the distribution for over a year. He zoomed in. The intercept happened here, right at the border between neutral ground and hostile territory. 30-second window where the truck would be isolated. No cameras, no witnesses. Someone told them exactly when to move. Who? Salvatore demanded. Matteo's fingers moved across the screen. He pulled up personnel files, schedules, communication logs. Only 5 people knew the exact departure time, Matteo said. 3 drivers, 1 dispatcher, 1 route supervisor. He highlighted a name. Vincent Longozutu supervisor. He's worked for us for 8 years. Clean record. But his bank account shows a deposit of $15,000 2 days before the intercept. Cash, no source listed. Caruso's face went dark. Longo's one of mine. Not anymore, Salvatore said. Within an hour, Vincent Longo was dragged into the compound. He swore he didn't know anything. Swore the money was from a cousin. Swore he'd never betray the family. Matteo showed him the deposit records, the timing, the amount, the pattern. Longo stopped swearing and started crying. Lorenzo said he'd protect me. Longo sobbed. Said when he took over I'd be rewarded. I didn't know he was going to. Salvatore didn't let him finish. He looked at Caruso and said one word. Handle it. Caruso nodded. 2 men dragged Longo out of the room. Ava heard him screaming all the way down the hallway. She felt sick. Matteo's face didn't change. He just closed the file and moved on to the next problem. That night, Ava found him in his office staring at the wall. You okay? She asked. I got a man killed today, Matteo said. Ava sat down across from him. You found a traitor. Same thing. No, Ava said firmly. It's not. Longo made a choice. He chose Lorenzo. He chose money. He knew what he was risking. He was scared, Matteo said. Lorenzo offered him security. I offered him nothing. You offered him honesty. Ava said, you didn't lie to him. You didn't manipulate him. You just showed him the consequences of his actions. Matteo finally looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. Does it get easier? He asked. I don't know, Ava admitted, but I hope not. Matteo almost smiled. Almost? Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His whole body went rigid. What is it? Ava asked. Matteo turned the phone so she could see. It was a text. No number, just a message. You took something from me. I'm going to take something from you. Ava's stomach dropped. Lorenzo. Matteo nodded. What do we do? We prepare, Matteo said, but his voice shook. Lorenzo's next move came fast and ugly. He hit 3 of the family's businesses in one night. A restaurant in Queens, a construction site in the Bronx, a shipping warehouse in Brooklyn. No one died, but the damage was massive. Fires, vandalism, tens of thousands of dollars in lost product and equipment. The message was clear. Lorenzo could strike anywhere, anytime. Salvatore's health deteriorated under the pressure. He had another episode. Worse. This time, the doctor said his heart couldn't take much more. Said he needed to step back, reduce stress. Salvatore told them to go to hell, but he was fading. Everyone could see it. He spent more time in bed than in meetings. His voice got weaker, his decision slower. The captain started looking to Matteo for answers instead of waiting for Salvatore to weigh in. Matteo hated it. Ava could see the weight crushing him. Every decision, every order, every person looking at him like he was supposed to have all the answers. He wasn't sleeping, barely eating. His routines had disintegrated completely. One morning, she found him in the bathroom, sitting on the floor with his hands over his ears, rocking slightly. Matteo, she said gently. He didn't respond. Ava sat down beside him, didn't touch him, didn't push, just waited. After a long time, Matteo spoke. There's too much noise, he said. I know. I can't think. I can't see the patterns. Everything's just chaos. Ava took a breath. Then we need to create structure. Matteo lowered his hands. How? We stop reacting, Ava said. We stop letting Lorenzo control the pace. We figure out what he wants, and we deny him that. He wants me gone, Matteo said flatly. No, Ava said. He wants you broken. There's a difference. If he just wanted you dead, you'd be dead. He's playing a psychological game. He's trying to prove you can't handle the pressure, that you'll collapse, that Salvatore made a mistake choosing you. Matteo stared at her. So, what do I do? You prove him wrong, Ava said. You stop trying to be your father or Lorenzo. You stop trying to lead the way they would. You do it your way. My way doesn't work in rooms full of people. Then don't use rooms full of people, Ava said. Use what you're good at. Information, precision, control. You don't need to be loud to be dangerous. Matteo was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. Okay, he said, get me everything we have on Lorenzo's movements over the last 2 weeks. Every sighting, every contact, every place he's been. Ava nodded. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to stop defending, Matteo said, and start hunting. Matteo spent the next 72 hours building a map. Not a physical map, a network. He tracked Lorenzo's known associates, his safe houses, his money, his supply lines. He cross-referenced phone records with security footage, matched timestamps with locations, built a web of connections that showed not just where Lorenzo was, but where he was going. And he found the pattern. Lorenzo was consolidating, pulling resources into a single location, preparing for something big. Here, Matteo said, pointing to a spot on the screen. Eva leaned in. It was an industrial complex in Red Hook, abandoned shipyards that had been empty for years. Lorenzo's been moving money and people there for the last week, Matteo continued. Small groups, quiet but consistent. He's building something. A base? Eva asked. A fortress, Matteo corrected. Somewhere he can operate from somewhere we can't touch him. Can we hit it? Matteo shook his head. Not directly. He'll have security traps. He's expecting us to come at him head on. So, what do we do? Matteo pulled up another file. Financial records, utilities, permits. We cut off his resources. Matteo said, water, power, access roads. We don't hit the location. We strangle it, make it unusable. Force him to move. And then we're ready when he does. It took 2 days to execute. Matteo didn't tell the captains, didn't ask permission. He just started making calls, pulling strings, using the family's connections in ways Lorenzo hadn't anticipated. The power company shut off electricity to the Red Hook complex for code violations. The water authority found contamination in the lines and cut service. The city's transportation department started emergency roadwork that blocked the main access route. Lorenzo's fortress became a trap, and when he tried to relocate, Matteo was waiting. Matteo had people watching every exit, every safe house, every contact Lorenzo had used in the last month. And when Lorenzo's crew started moving equipment out of Red Hook, Matteo's people followed. They didn't attack, didn't interfere, just watched, documented, learned. By the end of the week, Matteo had a complete picture of Lorenzo's operation. Every person, every location, every vulnerability. He presented it to Salvatore in the old man's bedroom. Salvatore was propped up in bed, oxygen tubes in his nose, looking like a ghost of himself. But his eyes were sharp. "This is good work," Salvatore said, studying the files. "It's not enough," Matteo said. "Lorenzo's still out there, still dangerous. We've slowed him down, but we haven't stopped him. So, what's your plan?" Matteo hesitated. "I want to meet with him." Salvatore's expression darkened. "That's suicide. It's strategy," Matteo said. "Lorenzo thinks I'm weak, thinks I'll hide behind you. If I reach out, if I propose a meeting, he'll take it because he thinks he can manipulate me, break me, maybe even kill me. And you're willing to risk that? I'm willing to end this," Matteo said quietly, "before it destroys what's left of the family." Salvatore studied his son for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "Set it up," he said, "but you don't go alone." "I have to." "No," Salvatore said firmly. "You take Eva and you take Marco." Marco was Salvatore's personal bodyguard, a massive man who'd been with the family for 30 years. He didn't talk much, but he was loyal to the core. "Fine," Matteo said. Salvatore reached out and gripped Matteo's hand. His palm was cold, his grip weak. "Be careful," Salvatore said. "Lorenzo's not just your brother anymore. He's a rabid dog, and rabid dogs don't think straight." "I know," Matteo said, but he didn't. Not really. The meeting was set for a warehouse in Long Island City. Neutral ground, no family ties. Lorenzo agreed immediately, which should have been the first warning sign. Matteo, Eva, and Marco arrived at dusk. The warehouse was enormous, filled with rows of empty shipping containers and rusted machinery, the kind of place where sounds echoed and shadows hit everything. Lorenzo was waiting in the center of the space, flanked by 6 men, all armed. Matteo walked forward. Marco stayed close. Eva hung back, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Little brother," Lorenzo said. His voice was friendly. Too friendly. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Matteo stopped 20 feet away. "I want to make a deal." Lorenzo laughed. "A deal? You humiliate me in front of the entire family, exile me, destroy my operations, and now you want to make a deal." "I want to stop the bleeding," Matteo said. "You've made your point. You've hurt us, cost us money, cost us credibility. But you're not winning. You're just burning resources, both of us are. So what are you proposing?" "A truce," Matteo said. "You walk away, take what you've built, and go somewhere else. Miami, Vegas, somewhere outside the family's territory. We won't come after you. You don't come after us. We both move on." Lorenzo tilted his head, studying Matteo like he was a puzzle. You really think I'd take that? I think you're smart enough to know this ends badly for both of us if it keeps going, Matteo said. Lorenzo smiled. It was a cold, cruel thing. You're right, he said. It does end badly for one of us. Then he nodded to his men. The lights went out, all of them, simultaneously. The warehouse plunged into complete darkness. Ava's breath caught. She heard movement, shouting, the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then the noise started. It came from everywhere at once. A high-pitched electronic screech that pierced through the darkness like knives. Overlapping frequencies, feedback loops designed to disorient, to overwhelm, to break Matteo. Ava heard him collapse, heard the sound of his body hitting concrete, heard him gasping, choking on air. Matteo, she screamed. She couldn't see him, couldn't see anything. The noise was so loud it felt like her skull was splitting. She dropped to her knees, crawling forward, hands searching blindly. She found him. He was curled on the ground, hands clamped over his ears, his whole body convulsing. His eyes were open but unfocused. He wasn't seeing her, wasn't hearing her. He was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere the world had turned into a nightmare. Stay with me, Ava shouted over the noise. Matteo, stay with me. He didn't respond. Lorenzo's voice cut through the chaos, amplified by speakers hidden throughout the warehouse. Did you really think you could beat me? Lorenzo said. You're a broken toy, Matteo. You always have been, and now everyone's going to see it. The noise got louder. Matteo started screaming. Ava pulled him close, wrapping herself around him, trying to block out the sound with her own body. It didn't work. Nothing worked. She felt him slipping away, felt him retreating into himself, felt the person she'd spent months helping build just disintegrate under the assault. Please, she whispered, please don't leave me. Matteo's screaming stopped, his breathing evened out, and then, impossibly, he opened his eyes. He looked at her, really looked at her. Ava, he said. His voice was barely audible over the noise. I'm here, she said. Get Marco, Matteo said. Tell him to cut the power. Mainbreaker, northeast corner, Ava blinked. How do you? I mapped the building before we came, Matteo said. His voice was strained but clear. Every exit, every system, every wire. I knew Lorenzo would try something. I just didn't know what. Ava stared at him. Then she scrambled to her feet and ran. She found Marco by following the sound of gunfire. He was pinned behind a container, exchanging shots with Lorenzo's men in the dark. Northeast corner, Ava shouted. Mainbreaker, cut the power. Marco didn't ask questions. He just moved. 30 seconds later, the noise stopped. The silence was deafening. Emergency lights flickered on, dim red, just enough to see shapes. Matteo was on his feet, shaking, pale but upright. Lorenzo stood across from him, his expression twisted with rage. You should be broken, Lorenzo said. I was, Matteo said quietly, and then I got back up. Lorenzo pulled a gun. Marco shot him first, not to kill, just the shoulder, enough to drop him. Lorenzo hit the ground hard, clutching his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. His men moved to help him, but Marco's gun swung toward them, and they froze. Matteo walked forward slowly. He stood over his brother, looking down at him with an expression Ava couldn't read. You're right, Matteo said. I am broken, but broken doesn't mean weak. It just means I had to learn how to survive in a world that wasn't built for me, and now I'm better at it than you'll ever be. Lorenzo spat blood. This isn't over. Yes, Matteo said. It is. He turned and walked away. Ava and Marco followed. Behind them, Lorenzo screamed threats into the darkness, but no one was listening anymore. They drove back to the compound in silence. Matteo sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his hands still trembling. Ava sat beside him. She didn't try to talk, just stayed close. When they arrived, Salvatore was waiting in his office. He looked worse than he had that morning. The meeting had taken everything out of him. What happened? Salvatore asked. Lorenzo tried to break him, Ava said. It didn't work. Salvatore looked at Matteo. Are you all right? Matteo didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said, Lorenzo's not going to stop, I know. So we finish it, Matteo said. We don't wait for him to regroup. We don't give him time to plan another attack. We end this now. Salvatore leaned back in his chair. What do you need? Matteo pulled out his tablet. His hands were steadier now, his voice stronger. I need access to everything. Every asset, every contact, every piece of leverage we have. You have it. Matteo nodded. Then give me 48 hours. And then what? Matteo looked his father in the eye. Then Lorenzo learns what happens when you underestimate someone you think is weak. Matteo didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. He turned his office into a command center, covering every surface with maps, financial records, surveillance photos, and communication logs. Ava brought him food he didn't eat and coffee he barely touched. He just worked, his fingers moving, across keyboards and tablets with a speed and focus she'd never seen before. "What are you building?" she asked on the second night. "A cage," Matteo said without looking up. "For Lorenzo, for everyone." Ava didn't understand, not yet, but she would. At dawn on the third day, Matteo finally stopped. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes bloodshot but clear, and looked at the screen surrounding him like a man studying a completed masterpiece. "It's ready," he said. "What is?" Matteo turned to face her. "Lorenzo thinks this is about territory, about who's stronger, who's more violent, but it's not. It's about information, and I have all of it." He pulled up a file on the main screen. It was massive. Thousands of pages, financial transactions, offshore accounts, shell companies, real estate holdings, every piece of the Moretti family's empire laid bare in forensic detail. "This is everything," Matteo said. "Every dollar, every property, every deal, legal and illegal. I've been building this database for months, cross-referencing tax records with shipping manifests, matching payments to contracts, finding the gaps where money disappears and reappears as something else." Ava stared at the screen. "Why?" "Because knowledge is control," Matteo said simply. "Lorenzo's guns. He has muscle. He has people who will kill for him. But I have this. I know where every dollar in this organization comes from and where it goes. I know who's skimming, who's loyal, who's vulnerable. And now I'm going to use it. How?" Matteo pulled up another file. This one was smaller. A list of names. 12 captains. "These are the men who haven't committed to either side yet," Matteo said. "The ones waiting to see who wins before they choose. Lorenzo thinks they're up for grabs, that he can buy them or intimidate them. And you're going to what? Outbid him?" "No," Matteo said. "I'm going to show them they don't have a choice." He opened the first file. Captain named DeMarco ran trucking operations in New Jersey. "DeMarco's been skimming for 3 years," Matteo said. "Small amounts. 2% per shipment adds up to about 400,000. He thinks no one noticed, but I did." He opened the next file. "Richie, Controlled Waste Management in Staten Island. Richie's been paying off a city inspector to ignore environmental violations. The inspector's taking $50,000 a year. If that comes out, Richie loses his contracts and probably goes to prison." Another file. "Torres, Real Estate Development in Queens. Torres has a gambling problem. He's into a casino in Atlantic City for 300 grand. The casino is owned by the Andrade family, our competitors. If they call in the debt, Torres is finished." Matteo went through all 12 files. Every captain, every secret, every vulnerability. "You're going to blackmail them," Ava said. "I'm going to give them clarity," Matteo corrected. "Right now, they're trying to figure out which side is safer. I'm going to show them that the only safe side is mine because I can destroy them whenever I want. Lorenzo can threaten them, but I can actually do it quietly, completely, without firing a shot." Ava felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the man she'd met at the gala, wasn't even the man she danced with on that ballroom floor. This was someone harder, colder, someone who'd learned how to weaponize the very thing that made him different. "What about Lorenzo?" she asked. Matteo's expression darkened. "Lorenzo's next, but first, I need to make sure he's alone." The meeting started that afternoon. One by one, Matteo called in the 12 captains. Not to the compound, not to some neutral location, to his office, his territory. DeMarco came first. He walked in confident, cocky, like he was doing Matteo a favor by showing up. Matteo didn't offer him a chair. "You've been skimming," Matteo said. DeMarco's smile faltered. "What?" Matteo turned his tablet around, showed him the numbers, the dates, the amounts. $407,000 over 36 months. Matteo said. "You've been very careful, very consistent, but not careful enough." DeMarco's face went pale. That's not. "You can stop lying," Matteo interrupted. "I'm not here to debate the facts. I'm here to tell you what happens next." DeMarco's throat worked. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something," Matteo said. "You've been trying to decide whether to back me or Lorenzo, whether to play it safe or pick a side, but you don't get that choice anymore." He pulled up another file. Bank account, information, addresses, photos of DeMarco's wife and kids. "If you choose Lorenzo," Matteo continued, his voice flat and emotionless, "I send this file to my father. He handles theft his way, and we both know how that ends. But if you choose me, this file disappears. The money you took gets quietly folded back into the books as a bonus. No one knows. No one cares. DeMarco was sweating now. You're saying I don't have a choice. I'm saying you have one choice, Matteo said. And you're smart enough to make the right one. DeMarco stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'm with you, he said quietly. Good, Matteo said. Get out. DeMarco left without another word. Ava, watching from the corner, felt sick, but she didn't say anything. The pattern repeated 11 more times. Ricci Torres. All of them. Matteo laid out their secrets with surgical precision, gave them the same choice, and watched them crumble. By the end of the day, all 12 captains had pledged their loyalty. Not because they believed in Matteo, not because they respected him, because they were terrified of him. That night, Ava confronted him. You're blackmailing people, she said. You're using fear and coercion to force loyalty. That's exactly what Lorenzo would do. No, Matteo said. Lorenzo uses violence. I use information. There's a difference. Is there? Ava shot back. You're still manipulating people, still taking away their choice. They had a choice, Matteo said. They chose to steal, to lie, to be vulnerable. I'm just holding them accountable. You're controlling them. Matteo looked at her. His eyes were tired, empty. Yes, he said. I am because if I don't, Lorenzo will, and his version of control involves a lot more blood. Ava wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was wrong, but she couldn't because he was right. I don't like who you're becoming, she said quietly. Neither do I, Matteo admitted, but it's the only way to survive this. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Matteo's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His expression shifted, something between satisfaction and dread. Lorenzo just found out, he said. Found out what? That his support just collapsed. That the 12 captains he thought he could recruit all chose me instead. How do you know? Matteo turned the phone so she could see. It was a text from one of his surveillance contacts. A brief message. Target is moving. Armed convoy heading east. Looks angry. He's coming here, Ava said. No, Matteo said. He's too smart for that. He knows the compound is fortified. He's going somewhere he thinks he has an advantage. Where? Matteo pulled up a map, highlighted a location in Brooklyn near the waterfront. The shipyards, he said. It's one of the last places he still controls. Lot of space, easy to defend, hard to infiltrate. So, we don't go, Ava said. We have to, because if we don't, he'll dig in there, and this drags on for months. More attacks, more blood, more destruction. I need to end it now. It's a trap. I know. Then why? Because I'm going to turn his trap into mine, Matteo said. Salvatore tried to stop him. The old man was barely conscious, hooked up to monitors and medication. But when he heard Matteo's plan, he fought his way out of bed and cornered his son in the hallway. You're walking into an ambush, Salvatore rasped. I'm walking into a battlefield I designed, Matteo corrected. You can't control everything, Matteo. Lorenzo's not a spreadsheet. He's a killer. I know, Matteo said. That's why I'm not going to fight him the way he expects. Salvatore grabbed his arm. His grip was weak but desperate. I can't lose you too, he said. Matteo looked at his father, at the man who'd spent his whole life building an empire on violence and intimidation, the man who was now dying because that empire had eaten him alive from the inside. You won't, Matteo said. But if I don't do this, you'll lose everything anyway. Salvatore's eyes filled, not with tears, with something worse. Resignation. You're smarter than I was, Salvatore said. Matteo nodded. Then he pulled away and walked toward the garage where Marco and a team of 6 men were waiting. Ava followed. You don't have to come, Matteo said. Yes, I do, Ava said. This is going to get bad. Then I'll be there when it does. Matteo looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just nodded and got into the car. They drove to Brooklyn in silence. 3 vehicles, Matteo and Ava in the lead car with Marco driving. The other men spread between the 2 follow cars, all armed, all ready. But ready for what? Ava wasn't sure. The shipyards were exactly as Matteo had described, massive, industrial, a graveyard of rusted cranes and emptying containers and warehouses that looked like they'd been abandoned since before Ava was born. The kind of place where screams would echo forever and no one would hear. Lorenzo's convoy was already there. 5 vehicles parked in a defensive cluster near the main warehouse. At least 20 men, maybe more. Matteo's convoy stopped 100 yards out. Marco turned to Matteo. How do you want to play this? I don't, Matteo said. Lorenzo does. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Lorenzo answered on the second ring. Little brother, Lorenzo said. His voice was tight, angry. You actually showed up. You wanted to finish this, Matteo said. Let's finish it. Just you and me. Just you and me, Matteo confirmed. No guns, no backup. You wanted to prove I'm weak. Prove it. Lorenzo laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. You think you can take me in a fight? You can barely stand in a crowded room without falling apart. Then it should be easy for you, Matteo said. The line went quiet for a moment. Ava could hear Lorenzo breathing on the other end. Fine, Lorenzo said finally. Center of the yard. 5 minutes. You don't show. I come for you. I'll be there, Matteo said. He hung up. Marco was staring at him. You're not actually going to fight him? No, Matteo said, but I need him to think I am. What's the real plan? Matteo pulled out his tablet. Showed them a schematic of the shipyard. He'd marked locations throughout the complex, equipment placements, sight lines, acoustic patterns. Lorenzo thinks this is his territory, Matteo said, but I've been studying this place for 3 days. Every building, every container, every piece of machinery. I know how sound travels here, how light reflects, how spaces connect. So what? Ava asked. So I'm going to do to him what he tried to do to me, Matteo said. I'm going to turn this entire shipyard into a sensory weapon. But instead of using it to break me, I'm using it to break his men, disorient them, scatter them, make them think they're under attack from every direction at once. Marco's eyes widened. How? Matteo pointed to the marked locations on the schematic. I had people place equipment throughout the yard last night. Industrial speakers, strobe lights, smoke machines, all wired to remote triggers. When I activate them, this place becomes a nightmare. Lorenzo's men won't know what's happening, won't know where to shoot, won't know if it's real or just noise. And while they're panicking, Marco asked, You and your team move in, Matteo said. Not to kill, to capture, to control. By the time Lorenzo realizes what's happening, it'll be over. Ava stared at him. You planned all of this. I planned for Lorenzo to bring me to a place he thought he controlled, Matteo said. And then I made sure he didn't. He checked his watch. 2 minutes. Marco, get your team in position. Ava, stay in the car. Like hell, Ava said. Matteo looked at her. His expression softened for just a second. Please, he said. No, Ava said firmly. You don't get to ask me to stay safe while you walk into danger. I'm going with you. Matteo opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He knew that tone, knew he'd already lost. Stay behind me, he said. Ava nodded. They got out of the car. The center of the shipyard was a wide-open space surrounded by stacks of containers and rusted machinery. Lorenzo was already there, flanked by 4 of his biggest men. He looked calm, confident, like he'd already won. Matteo walked toward him slowly. Ava stayed 3 steps back, her heart hammering in her chest. Lorenzo smiled. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I don't run, Matteo said. You've been running your whole life, Lorenzo shot back. Hiding behind Pop, behind routines, behind her gestured. You're not a leader, Matteo. You're a coward who got lucky. Maybe, Matteo said, but I'm the coward who just took your entire organization apart without throwing a single punch. Lorenzo's smile vanished. What did you say? The 12 captains you were counting on, Matteo said. They're mine now. Your supply lines? I've rerouted them. Your money frozen. Your contacts? They're not returning your calls anymore. You don't have an organization, Lorenzo. You have 20 men and a pile of scrap metal. Lorenzo's face went dark red. You're lying. Call them, Matteo said. See who answers. Lorenzo pulled out his phone, dialed, waited. No answer. He tried another number, another, nothing. His hand was shaking when he finally lowered the phone. You're dead? Lorenzo said quietly. Maybe, Matteo said, but you're already buried. Lorenzo lunged. He was fast, trained, vicious. Matteo wasn't. Lorenzo's fist connected with Matteo's jaw, and Matteo went down hard, hitting the concrete with a sound that made Ava scream. Lorenzo didn't stop. He kicked Matteo in the ribs, once, twice. Matteo curled into a ball, trying to protect himself, but Lorenzo just kept hitting him. Ava ran forward, but one of Lorenzo's men grabbed her, held her back. Matteo, she screamed. Lorenzo grabbed Matteo by the collar and hauled him up. Matteo's face was bloody, his eyes unfocused. You thought you were smart, Lorenzo hissed. You thought you could outsmart me, but you're still the same broken little boy you've always been. Matteo's hand moved just slightly. His fingers found the phone in his pocket, pressed a button, and the shipyard exploded into chaos. The speakers activated first a deafening wall of sound that came from every direction at once. industrial grinding metal on metal feedback loops that made it impossible to think. Then the lights. Strobes placed on every container, every crane, flashing in irregular patterns that turned the entire yard into a disorienting strobe nightmare. Then the smoke, thick and gray, pouring from machines hidden throughout the complex, filling the space until you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. Lorenzo's men panicked immediately. They started shooting, not at targets, just at shadows, at sounds, at nothing. Lorenzo dropped Matteo and spun around trying to understand what was happening, and Marco's team moved in. They came from every direction, not guns blazing, quiet, controlled, using the chaos as cover. They took down Lorenzo's men one by one, disarming them, restraining them, removing them from the fight before they even knew they were in one. Lorenzo tried to run. Matteo grabbed his ankle. Lorenzo looked down. Matteo's face was a mess, but his eyes were clear. "I told you," Matteo said through bloody teeth. "This is my trap." Lorenzo kicked free and ran into the smoke. Matteo tried to stand, but his ribs screamed and he collapsed again. Ava broke free from the distracted guard and ran to him. "Don't move," she said, kneeling beside him. "Lorenzo, let Marco handle it," Ava said. She pressed her hand to his bleeding face. "You did your part." The chaos continued for another 3 minutes. Then, slowly, the sounds of fighting stopped. The smoke began to clear. When Ava could finally see again, the shipyard was quiet. Lorenzo's men were on the ground, zip-tied, disarmed, finished. Marco walked out of the smoke, dragging Lorenzo behind him. Lorenzo's face was bruised, his hands bound, his expression twisted with rage. Marco dropped him at Matteo's feet. "It's done," Marco said. Matteo looked down at his brother, at the man who'd spent years treating him like he didn't exist, who'd stolen from their family, who tried to kill him, who'd done everything possible to prove Matteo was weak to survive. "What now? You going to kill me?" That's not style." "No," Matteo said quietly. "It's not." He pulled out his phone, made a call. "It's done," he said into the phone. "Send them in." 5 minutes later, 3 black SUVs rolled into the shipyard. Federal agents. Lorenzo's eyes went wide. "What did you do?" "I made a deal," Matteo said. "The feds have been investigating the Volkov family for 2 years. The Russians you've been feeding information to. I gave them everything I had on your communications with them. Proof of collaboration, conspiracy, enough to put you away for 20 years. You turned me over to the feds." Lorenzo's voice was shaking. "You're a dead man. You broke the code. You." "I protected my family," Matteo interrupted. "You stopped being family the second you sold us out to the Russians. This way, you disappear. Quietly, no war, no blood, just gone." The agents pulled Lorenzo to his feet, read him his rights, started walking him toward the vehicles. Lorenzo looked back at Matteo one last time. "You're not strong enough for this world," Lorenzo said. "Maybe not," Matteo said. "But I'm still standing, and you're not." They put Lorenzo in the car and drove away. The shipyard fell silent. Ava helped Matteo to his feet. He was shaking, bleeding, barely able to stand, but he was alive. "Did we win?" he asked quietly. Ava looked around at the aftermath, at the captured men, at the empty space where Lorenzo had been. "Yeah," she said. "I think we did." Matteo nodded. Then his legs gave out, and Ava caught him before he hit the ground. "Get him to a doctor," Marco said, already moving to help. They carried Matteo to the car. As they drove away from the shipyard, Ava held his hand and watched his eyes drift closed. He'd done it. He'd beaten Lorenzo, beaten the system designed to destroy him. But the cost was written all over his broken face. And Ava wondered if winning had been worth it. Matteo spent 3 days in bed recovering from the shipyard. 2 cracked ribs, a fractured cheekbone, bruises that turned his entire torso into a canvas of purple and black. The compound's doctor said he was lucky. Nothing worse had broken. Ava thought luck had nothing to do with it. Matteo had calculated the risk down to the bone and decided his body was an acceptable cost for victory. She hated that he'd been right. Salvatore came to see him on the 2nd day. The old man looked worse than his son. His skin was gray, his breathing labored, but he insisted on walking to Matteo's room without help. He sat down in the chair beside the bed and just stared at Matteo for a long time. "You did what I couldn't," Salvatore said finally. Matteo's eyes opened. "What's that?" "You ended it without starting a war. Lorenzo's in federal custody, facing 20 years. Matteo said half his crew's arrested, the other half scattered. That's not exactly peaceful." "It's cleaner than what I would have done," Salvatore said. "I would have had him killed, publicly made an example, turned the whole city into a bloodbath. I know. Salvatore leaned forward, wincing at the effort. You're better than me, Matteo. Better than Lorenzo. Better than this whole rotten system. And that scares the hell out of me. Why? Because I don't know if being better is enough, Salvatore said. This world eats good men alive, turns them into something else. I've watched it happen 1,000 times. Matteo looked at his father. Really? Looked at him, saw the weight of 50 years of violence carved into every line of his face. I'm not trying to be good, Matteo said quietly. I'm just trying to survive. That's what we all tell ourselves at the start, Salvatore said. Just remember, survival is not the same as living. He stood, groaning with the effort, and walked to the door. Then he stopped. Your mother would have been proud of you, he said without turning around. She always knew you were stronger than the rest of us. I just wish she'd lived long enough to see it. Then he left. Ava, sitting in the corner of the room, watched Matteo's face, saw something flicker there. Not quite grief, not quite relief. Something in between. You okay? She asked. I don't know, Matteo said. Ask me in a year. The family summit happened a week later. Matteo was still moving, stiff, still bruised, but functional enough to sit in a room full of men who'd spent the last month trying to figure out if he was weak or dangerous. They had their answer now. The main hall was packed. Every captain, every major earner, even some of the lower-level crews who normally didn't get invited to these things. Salvatore sat at the head of the table, but everyone knew he wasn't running the meeting. He was just there to make it official. Matteo sat to his right. Ava stood against the wall, watching. Salvatore opened with a short speech, thanked everyone for their loyalty, acknowledged the difficulty of the last few months. Then he got to the point. Lorenzo's gone, Salvatore said. He betrayed this family, stole from us, conspired with our enemies, and now he's paying the price. But his absence leaves a gap, a question about who leads this organization when I'm gone. The room was silent. I'm not going to be around much longer, Salvatore continued. His voice was steady, but everyone could hear the truth underneath. My health's failing. The doctors give me months, not years. So, I need to know this family's in good hands before I go. He looked at Matteo. My son has proven himself, Salvatore said. He saw what the rest of us missed. He stopped a war before it started. He protected this family when it would have been easier to let it burn. And he did it without becoming the monster this world usually requires. He stood slowly, painfully. Matteo is my heir, Salvatore said. When I die, he leads. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave now. No one moved. Salvatore sat back down. Good. Now, Matteo has something to say. Matteo stood. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was clear. I'm not my father, he said. I'm not Lorenzo. I can't lead the way they did. I can't walk into a room and command respect through presence or intimidation. That's not who I am. He pulled out his tablet, set it on the table. But I can see things they couldn't. I can find patterns in chaos. I can analyze risk and predict outcomes and build systems that make us stronger without making us sloppier. And that's what this family needs right now. He pulled up a document, projected it onto the screen behind him. This is a restructuring plan, Matteo said. It consolidates our operations, cuts out redundancies, eliminates the areas where we're most vulnerable to law enforcement. It reduces our footprint, but increases our efficiency. We make the same money with half the risk. He clicked to the next slide. I've also identified 12 legitimate businesses we can acquire over the next 2 years. Real companies, legal income. They'll serve as shields for the operations that can't go clean, but they'll also generate actual profit, actual growth. Another slide. And I've built a new communication structure, encrypted, compartmentalized. If one part gets compromised, the rest stays intact. No more single points of failure. No more one person knowing enough to bring down the whole organization. He looked around the room. I'm not going to pretend this is going to be easy, Matteo said. Change never is. But if we keep operating the way we have been, we'll end up dead or in prison. I've run the numbers. We have maybe 5 years before the feds close on something we can't wiggle out of unless we adapt. One of the older captains, a man named Greco, raised his hand. You're talking about going soft, Greco said, hiding behind paperwork and computers. That's not how this world works. No, Matteo said. I'm talking about going smart. The families that survive aren't the loudest or the most violent. They're the ones that know when to evolve, when to step back, when to let the world think they're something they're not. And you think you can do that? Greco challenged. I think I already have, Matteo said. He pulled up another file. Financial projections, risk assessments, probability matrices. I've mapped out the next 3 years, Matteo said. If we follow this plan, our annual revenue increases by 18%. Our exposure to law enforcement drops by 43%. And our mortality rate, the number of people in this organization who end up dead or arrested, drops by 60%. The room went quiet. You're offering us a longer life, another captain said slowly. I'm offering you a smarter one, Matteo corrected. You can keep playing the old game and hope you're the exception, who doesn't end up in a cell or a grave, or you can trust that I know what I'm doing. Greco leaned back in his chair, and if we don't, Matteo's expression didn't change. Then you're free to leave. Find another family. Try your luck elsewhere. But if you stay, you follow my rules, and my rules are simple. Be smart, be quiet, and don't make me clean up your mistakes. Greco stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'm in, he said. One by one, the rest of the room followed. Salvatore died 6 weeks later. Heart failure, quiet at home, surrounded by the few people he actually trusted. Matteo was there. So was Eva. Marco stood by the door, silent and solid as always. The old man's last words were to Matteo. Don't let this world make you cruel, Salvatore whispered. And don't let being kind make you weak. Find the space between. That's where you'll survive. Matteo nodded. He didn't cry, didn't break down. Just held his father's hand until the old man stopped breathing. The funeral was massive. Hundreds of people. Politicians, businessmen, criminals dressed like accountants. Everyone who'd ever feared or respected or owed Salvatore Moretti showed up to pay their respects. Matteo gave the eulogy. It was short, factual. He talked about his father's legacy, his strength, his flaws. He didn't romanticize, didn't pretend Salvatore had been something he wasn't. My father built an empire, Matteo said. But empires don't last unless they evolve, unless they adapt to the world around them. He understood that at the end, and I'm going to honor that understanding by making sure this family survives long after his name is forgotten. It wasn't a traditional eulogy, but it was honest. And honesty, Eva was learning, was Matteo's version of respect. The transition of power was smoother than anyone expected. Matteo didn't try to fill his father's shoes. Didn't try to buy the charismatic Don who held court and made grand pronouncements. He just worked. He implemented his restructuring plan quietly, methodically, shut down operations that were too exposed, redirected resources into cleaner ventures, built walls between the legal businesses and the illegal ones so thick that even a federal investigation would struggle to connect them. He met with captains individually, not in group settings where he'd have to perform one-on-one, where he could focus, where he could show them the numbers, prove that his way worked, and it did work. Within 3 months, the family's income was up, arrests were down. The feds, who'd been circling like sharks, suddenly found their investigations running into dead ends and legal barriers. Matteo wasn't louder than his father, wasn't more violent, wasn't more visible, but he was more effective. And slowly, grudgingly, the organization started to respect him for it. Eva watched the transformation from the inside, watched Matteo go from the invisible son to the undisputed head of the family, watched him build something that didn't rely on fear or brutality, but on cold, merciless efficiency. It should have made her proud. Instead, it scared her because the man she danced with at that gala, the one who'd been overwhelmed and vulnerable and human, was disappearing, being replaced by something harder, something that could look a man in the eye and destroy his life with a spreadsheet and never flinch. One night, 4 months after Salvatore's death, she found Matteo in his office at 2 a.m. He was staring at a screen full of financial data, his face blank. You need to sleep, she said. I will, Matteo said without looking up. That's what you said last night, and I did, eventually. Eva walked over and closed his laptop. Matteo finally looked at her. What? He said. You're losing yourself, Eva said. Matteo frowned. What are you talking about? This? She gestured at the office. The files, the screens. You've turned yourself into a machine. You work 16 hours a day. You don't eat unless I force you. You don't talk to anyone unless it's about business. You're not living, Matteo. You're just surviving. And surviving isn't enough. It's all I know how to do, Matteo said quietly. That's not true, Eva said. You know how to be more than this. I've seen it. The man who sat on a bathroom floor and admitted he was overwhelmed. The man who asked me to dance because he needed help. That person is still in there somewhere. That person almost got me killed, Matteo said. That person survived, Ava corrected. Not because he became someone else, but because he learned how to exist in a world that wasn't built for him. And now you're letting that world turn you into just another version of the men who tried to destroy you. Matteo looked away. I don't know how to be both. The person I was and the person I need to be. They don't fit together. Then stop trying to fit, Ava said. Just be human, flawed, imperfect, scared sometimes. That's not weakness. That's what makes you different from every other monster running this city. Matteo was quiet for a long time. Then he said, what if being different isn't enough? It already has been, Ava said. You beat Lorenzo. You took over the family. You changed everything. And you did it without becoming him. That's not nothing, Matteo. That's everything. Matteo's hands resting on the desk started to shake just slightly. I'm tired, he admitted. I know. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Then don't do it alone, Ava said. She reached across the desk and took his hand. His fingers curled around hers, gripping tight. I need you, Matteo said quietly. Not as an employee, not as a handler. I need you to stay because you want to, because you see something in me worth staying for. Ava squeezed his hand. I see everything in you worth staying for, she said. The question is whether you're going to let me. Matteo looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in weeks, his eyes weren't empty. They were full of something raw and uncertain and desperately human. Stay, he said. Okay, Ava said, but on one condition. What? You let me help you build a life, not just an empire. A life, one where you sleep, where you eat, where you do something other than work, where you remember what it feels like to be a person and not just a position. Matteo's mouth twitched, almost a smile. That sounds hard, he said. It is, Ava said. But I think you're up for it. Matteo pulled her around the desk and into his arms. He held her, like she was the only real thing in a world made of shadows and numbers and lies. And for the first time since his father died, he let himself feel something other than the weight of responsibility. He let himself feel hope. 6 months later, Matteo called another family summit. But this one was different. He didn't talk about restructuring or profit margins or risk assessments. He talked about the future. I've been running this organization for half a year, Matteo said, and in that time, we've become more stable, more profitable, safer. But I'm not interested in just maintaining what my father built. I want to transform it. He pulled up a presentation. Over the next 5 years, Matteo said, I'm going to transition this family out of 60% of our illegal operations. We're going to divest from drugs entirely, scale back protection rackets, eliminate the businesses that put us in direct conflict with law enforcement. The room stirred. A few captains looked nervous. I know what you're thinking, Matteo continued, that I'm going soft, that I'm trying to turn us into something we're not. But here's the reality. The old model is dying. The families that stay in the old games are getting wiped out by the feds, by new competitors who don't respect the old rules, by their own greed. He clicked to the next slide, a graph showing the decline of traditional organized crime over the last 2 decades. We survive by adapting, Matteo said. We become something the world doesn't recognize as a threat. We go legitimate where we can. We stay invisible where we can't. And we build something that lasts longer than 1 generation. Greco raised his hand, and the men who don't want to go legitimate, who like the old way. Then they leave with the severance and my blessing, Matteo said. Or they stay and follow the new rules. But there's no middle ground anymore. You're either building the future with me, or you're clinging to a past that's already dead. The room was silent. Then Caruso stood. I'm with you. One by one, the others followed. Not because they loved the plan, but because they trusted Matteo's numbers more than their own instincts. And that was enough. A year after taking over, Matteo made his first major legitimate acquisition, a tech company specializing in logistics software. It was clean, legal, profitable, and it gave the family a foothold in an industry that could grow without bringing federal attention. Ava watched him sign the papers and saw something she hadn't seen in months. Pride, not in conquering, not in controlling, but in building something real. That night, they had dinner together, not in the compound in a restaurant in Manhattan, a normal restaurant where normal people ate normal food and no one was carrying a gun. This feels weird, Matteo said. Good weird or bad weird? Ava asked. I don't know yet. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Matteo said, I've been thinking about what you said about having a life. And I want to try, Matteo said. I don't know if I'm good at it, but I want to try. Ava smiled. What does that look like for you? I don't know, Matteo admitted. Maybe normal things, dinners, conversations that aren't about business. Maybe, he hesitated, maybe building something with you that isn't about survival. Ava's heart did something complicated in her chest. What are you asking me? She said quietly. Matteo looked at her. His eyes were clear, honest, terrified. I'm asking if you'd be willing to stay, he said. Not as my employee, not as my handler, as my partner in all of this. The empire, the life, everything. Ava didn't answer right away. She looked at the man across from her, the one who'd gone from invisible to unstoppable, the one who'd learned to weaponize his differences instead of hiding from them, the one who still, despite everything, looked at her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to humanity. Yes, she said. Matteo's face broke into something that might have been relief or joy or both. Yes, he repeated. Yes, Ava said, but on one condition. What? You dance with me, she said. Right now in this restaurant in front of all these people. No emergency, no crisis, just because I'm asking. Matteo looked around the restaurant at the couples eating, the waiters moving between tables, the normal world he'd spent his whole life feeling excluded from. Then he stood and offered her his hand. Ava took it. They danced in the middle of the restaurant, slow and awkward and completely out of step with the background music. People stared. A few smiled. One couple even started clapping. Matteo didn't care. He just held Ava and moved with her, and let himself exist in a moment that had nothing to do with power or strategy or survival. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged. 2 years later, Matteo and Ava stood in the main hall of the compound, watching as the final pieces of the restructuring fell into place. The family was smaller now, leaner, but stronger, more sustainable. They'd cut their illegal operations by 70%. Built a portfolio of legitimate businesses that generated real income, created systems that could survive leadership transitions without collapsing into chaos. And most importantly, they'd done it without becoming the thing they'd fought against. You did it, Ava said. We did it, Matteo corrected. He looked at her at the woman who'd crossed a ballroom floor 2 years ago and changed his entire life with a single act of compassion. I need to ask you something, Matteo said. Ava turned to him. What? Matteo pulled a small box from his pocket, opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, nothing flashy. I know I'm not easy, Matteo said. I know I'm complicated and broken, and sometimes impossible to understand, but you stayed anyway. You saw something in me worth fighting for when no one else did, and I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're choosing to stay. Ava's eyes filled. Will you marry me? Matteo asked. Ava didn't hesitate. Yes, she said. Matteo slipped the ring on her finger. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her like he'd held her that night in the restaurant, like she was the only real thing in a world full of shadows. And maybe she was. They got married 3 months later. Small ceremony, just the people who mattered. Marco stood as Matteo's best man. Ava's younger brother walked her down the aisle. When they exchanged vows, Matteo's voice shook, but he got through it. And when the officiant said he could kiss his bride, Matteo did in front of everyone without hesitation, because he'd learned finally that being seen wasn't the same as being weak. It was just being human. 5 years after taking over the family, Matteo stepped back from day-to-day operations. He'd built a leadership structure that didn't require him to be the sole decision-maker, promoted people who understood the new model, created checks and balances that prevented any one person from accumulating too much power. He and Ava focused on the legitimate businesses, grew them into something real, something that could stand on its own. And when their first child was born, a daughter with Ava's eyes and Matteo's quiet intensity, Matteo made a promise. She'll never have to live the way I did, he said, holding the tiny baby in his arms. She'll never have to feel invisible. Never have to prove she's worth seeing. I'll make sure of it. Ava kissed his forehead. You already have. Matteo looked down at his daughter, at the future he'd built from the wreckage of a life that had almost destroyed him, and he realized something his father had tried to tell him all along. Survival wasn't enough. Living was what mattered. Building something that lasted. Building something real. Building something with the person who'd first shown him he was worth saving. That was power, not the kind that came from fear or violence or control. The kind that came from choosing every single day to be more than the world expected. Matteo had spent his whole life being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like he didn't matter. And in the end, he'd proven that the people who underestimated him had been the ones who mattered least. He'd survived the darkness, mastered it, and then chosen to step into the light with the woman who'd first pulled him there. That was the real victory, not the empire, not the power, not the fear, the choice to be human in a world that rewarded monsters. And the courage to build a life where being different wasn't a weakness. It was the reason he'd won.